If you don't feel like you're being valued in the environment that you spend 40 plus hours a week sometime, then that's going to have a huge impact on you and what enjoyment you get out of your work. So when we talk about work-life balance, I don't like there being a different Ellie in work and a different Ellie in life, which I probably did do to an extent when I started my career. I was like, I'm going to go and buy new suits. This is what I am. No, I don't party on the weekends. No, I am like...
3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello everybody and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Engineering Buzzcast. My name is Jacob Primus and I'm joined here today as usual with my good mate and co-host Daniel Hardy. Now today we bring you this episode straight from the KPMG office here in the sunny and might I mention humid Brisbane, capital of Queensland, Australia. Now joining us for today's episode is Ellie Hubbard, an Associate Director of Engineering for the Assets and Project Delivery team at KPMG. Ellie is a seasoned pro in the project delivery and asset management sector with a wealth of experience in not only client engagement but also engineering assurance. Having built her impressive career around effective decision making and more specifically risk. And no, I don't mean the board game. We'll also delve into Ellie's insights on career progression, work-life balance, but also most importantly, how to identify the opportunities that can really align with your engineering career goals and the steps that you can take to get there. So sit back, relax, and I'll let Ellie tell you all about it. We'll get started. Ellie, welcome to the Engineering Buzzcast.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time out to do this today. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
So Ellie, let's get a little bit of a taste of your life as the Associate Director for Engineering on the Assets and Project Delivery team at KPMG. Can you just walk us through like a typical week for you and give us a glimpse into some of the amazing projects that you're working on currently?
This is actually a really hard question to answer because I don't really have a typical week. I guess there are some activities that I do on a consistent basis. So obviously within our team, as the name suggests, we have a lot of engineers. We've got about 400 engineers across Australia. For me, I do a lot of work in the power and utilities space. So working a lot with distributors, power distributors or water utilities in asset management. So really working with them on how do they make better decisions around how they manage their assets now and into the future. And that could look like very different things on a different week. So most of my week will be on project delivery, so working with clients either virtually or in their office. There's kind of an element of business development, so working on proposals or client engagements and growing that pipeline of work for the team, and also an element of team leadership, so thinking about are the team happy, are they engaged, are we working on projects that they want to work on, making sure that that sort of strategy for the team's thought through as well.
Yeah. Making sure they got Cake Wednesday.
Cake Wednesday is a big part of the team engagement, yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. And more importantly, what do KPMG do? Like for people who haven't heard about KPMG and just thinking like, is it an acronym? Like what is it? Like
it is an acronym, but I can't tell you what it is. You'll have to Google that. It's the partners' last names.
Okay.
It's a fair question. I actually didn't really know that KPMG had this offering before I was going through the application process. So I sit within an infrastructure assets and places division that's relatively new. It's only about 18 months old. So in the scheme of KPMG as a firm who's been around for ages, we're the baby. We get a little bit of license to grow our own team.
There's opportunity there.
Yeah, which is new and exciting because when I thought of KPMG, I didn't necessarily think of engineering. And I think the big four, so KPMG, PwC, EY, and Deloitte have a bit of a reputation for working you to the bone and being really focused on outcomes and not focused on people. And kind of my experience here has smashed all of those preconceived ideas I had.
That's cool.
We at Infrastructure Assets and Places division have engineers, but we also have town planners and business case authors, people who get involved in more of the commercial and technical due diligence of a deal. So really from the end to end of anything and everything you can think of
It's
associated with an asset. What we don't typically get more involved in is design and construction supervision.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, more about your daily grind at KPMG, I guess. You talked about like it changes from day to day and from week to week. So could you give us like a little bit of a sneak peek into like, you mentioned that you work not primarily construction, but other assets or other parts of engineering. What sort of parts of engineering would that be?
Yeah. So I work mostly in the asset management space. So that's sort of thinking about how do I manage my asset holistically? So it's not just thinking about that design and upfront planning and delivery and construction. It's also thinking about how do I get the best use of it through its life? And how do I do that in a way that's effective, but it's kind of balancing risk and cost and performance?
Yeah.
So it's a bit more of the bringing the business acumen into engineering and making those decisions in a way that kind of trades off those different variables.
Yeah, right. Was that like previously sort of divided a little bit before between business and engineering, or like has there always been a merge?
I think if anything, it's been an artificial divide. Like I think all engineers should be thinking about these sorts of things. I don't think it's really an effective engineering outcome if you're not thinking about these sorts of things. And maybe some engineers think of them separately and think of a technical outcome and a business outcome. I don't think you can really diverge the two. I think they operate like everyone makes business decisions at the end of the day. We're all in a commercial environment. So I think it's an artificial silo.
But it's necessary though, because you really need to be able to like conflate the two and holistically look at problems and the longevity of projects and stuff like that.
Yeah. And it also brings in some of the other softer elements as well, like how do you have the right people to be managing your assets, and are your systems set up right so that you're making it easy for people, and you know, how are you communicating that to boards and to your
all the little things added together makes a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the beauty of working at a firm like KPMG is obviously we all have limits of our expertise, but we can work with people who are in our management consulting part who really get staff and personnel and workforce considerations. So we can bring a really blended approach of thinking of the technical elements and the people elements and everything that goes into running assets.
It's huge.
That's awesome. Well, obviously we're the engineering buzzcast. So what is something buzzing or new innovation, new ideas, new technology, you know, coming around in your industry at the moment, and what is KPMG doing in that sort of aspect?
Probably mostly what we're seeing is in the power space. Like we're in a huge energy transition. Everyone's trying to get to net zero. Everyone's trying to work out what does that mean for me and what do I need to do differently. And so, I mean, renewables have been around for a while, but we're really seeing a big uptake of that in the market, which is great. But obviously our clients need to understand what does that mean for them when they've traditionally had a poles and wires business, and how do they continue to provide reliable service to their customers when they're dealing with these new and emerging technologies. So definitely seeing that uptake, new sort of technologies being focused on like hydrogen, where there's been big announcements in Queensland around that.
It's going to be super interesting what happens with hydrogen.
Yeah.
It's still almost like just new. Like people only really have just heard like, oh, hydrogen, like, what, you know, what's going on there? Yeah. But I reckon it'll be like the next solar or something like that.
Yeah.
Pretty
I think the infrastructure around it is going to be the biggest challenge as well.
Definitely.
It's a whole new
like,
industry.
especially for Queensland and places that are quite rural in Australia. That's going to be like a huge problem.
Exactly. And so the hubs in Queensland that have been announced are in Townsville and Gladstone. And so it's like there's been a decision to have hydrogen hubs there. But then what does that mean? And who looks after the infrastructure? How does it affect things like our ports that need to export? And so that really systems-based thinking of how do we make this work? How do we make new infrastructure work with our existing infrastructure?
Yeah.
And you don't want to go taking away the old infrastructure away too fast, because then people don't have the time to adapt to that new one. And also I feel like it's a very fine line between convincing them, oh, hey, this is new technology, but it's going to take away your old things. Are you ready to adapt to it? Sort of like pulling the rug under their feet.
It's a whole cultural shift sort of thing.
Definitely.
Everyone has to be on board to just shift over slowly.
Yeah. And I think we're pretty picky as customers. Like we expect to be able to come to our homes and turn our lights on and have access to Wi-Fi all the time. We don't expect intermittent power supply. And so that I don't think as a community we're educated enough around, we want green energy, but what does that actually mean for me? And am I individually going to take the responsibility to maybe reduce how much I'm using? And that awareness piece, I think, is something that could grow.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing everyone thinks of too is personally, how does this financially affect me as
Yes.
well?
Yeah.
Especially like because it affects your general life, not just your work life. It affects you at home and everything, like you just mentioned. So like I guess people will immediately think, oh, how's this going to financially impact me as well?
Definitely.
That's the big thing.
Yeah, we want our cake and eat it too. We want green energy, but we don't want to pay for it.
Especially on Wednesdays.
Especially on Wednesdays.
So, like, out of these shifts, which of these can we expect to sort of have a lasting impact and shape the future of the engineering industry? So what should we start moving towards now that may affect something in the future that you've seen or you've heard someone speak about or you've seen in your industry?
I mean, I think the energy transition's here to stay. All the net zero targets have been agreed at an international level and are getting filtered down to what does that mean for us at a state level. So that's going to be around for our lifetime. In Brisbane, we've got the Olympics that's kind of driving a bit more action as well. We want to have a showcase on Brisbane and be carbon positive Olympics. So that's definitely here to stay for at least the next few decades. And so I guess with that comes a bit of a shift in maybe the skills that I have now are not going to be the skills that I need in the future, or maybe there's new jobs that we need that we haven't yet thought of, and how can we stay across that changing landscape?
That's the scary thing. It's like, will there be a vacuum in a sense of jobs where like people don't have those skills now that they're going to need in the future? I guess it's sort of like that. At that point in time when computers first came out, it was like the people that couldn't use computers and the people that can use computers, and it drew that line in a sense. I think like it's looking at that and seeing, can you predict that in a sense, I guess, is the biggest challenge.
As
like,
in, do you think we'll have a drop-off or a big demand?
Yeah. Like, do you think there'll be any specific skills that maybe engineers should be looking at now, or anything that you've seen?
It's interesting because I think we have a bit of a skill shortage now, let alone considering what we need in the future. And I don't think COVID and lockdowns have really helped because we have less internationals coming in to help us out with skilled work. I think, again, it's a bit of a balance of how do we keep doing what we're already doing, but how can we help prepare people for a bit of a transition? Because I think we don't necessarily know what all the skills will be. We know that there are some emerging areas that we can kind of have no regrets. Let's bank on this. We know this will be needed. But I don't think we know what we don't know, and there might be
with
new
hydrogen
things
and stuff. We don't even know what jobs could exist in 10 years regarding that. Like new engineers, entire new subsections of engineering could be just
waiting to happen.
Just waiting to happen.
But some of it might be transferable, and maybe we just call it a different thing, but it's the same sort of skill set that we already have.
That's true. That's actually a good point, because like we do have the skills now. Will it just have like a new title in the future? Like I've seen that happen quite a lot. A few titles just change around when realistically they're just using the same skills that they've already had, and they just slap a new fancy title on top of it.
Especially if they're going for a new job.
It looks good. It
looks good on the resume. So in your opinion, what steps should, I guess this is a very big question, what steps should Australia be making towards this, and the engineering industry as a whole, towards a continued focus on engineering solutions that are not only effective but also very practical as well? It's a key part.
I think that workforce part is part of it. I think we need to keep growing the pipeline of future engineers and allowing trade skilled workers to come in from overseas, so we've got the people to enable that. Most of what I do is, we call it prudency and efficiency. So it's how do you know that you're doing the right thing, and how do you know you're doing it the right way? So how can you do it in the most effective way? And that really changes depending on what do you value. And so I think that's when the kind of interesting and grey conversations around what do we value to make sure we know we're doing the right thing might change within an organisation or within a different landscape. And we are seeing a bit of a shift in value. I think historically companies really valued financial security and decisions were made purely on economics. And now we're seeing a bit of a shift towards how do we value the social impacts? How do we value, the environmental impacts? And how do we know that we're really getting the best value out of this decision? So that's a bit of a shift in mindset as well towards having confidence in the decisions we're making.
Almost like defining value differently.
Yeah, exactly. And like people seem to steer away when it's hard to quantify. It's really easy to quantify financial benefits.
Can't chuck it in a pie graph and put a bunch of fancy numbers on it.
Exactly. it's a bit harder to, how do you value social amenity, and how do you value environmental impacts, and those discussions become a little bit more robust.
Yeah, and that's the thing, it carries so much weight too that people don't really see, especially engineers sometimes, in terms of those values, because like without those, the projects sometimes collapse, especially with companies like KPMG where you're interacting with clients like on a weekly, daily basis, and you're trying to push that out there. I guess it does carry a lot of value.
And I guess we see like the power industry does this really well, where they're thinking about what impact do they have on their customers. So they think about, how do I make sure my supply is reliable, but also for those who own poles and wires, how do I make sure I'm not creating bushfires if some of my assets fail? Or how do I make sure I'm not creating a safety consequence here from my decision? So industries like that are asset intensive and have a lot of interaction with customers are thinking about these things, and they're thinking about, how can I do this better? How do I have more data to support some of these decisions?
True. I'm guessing that plays a lot into like the risk identification processes as well, and identifying what the current risks are, what the future risks are going to be. Like, have you done much of that recently in your job?
Yeah, definitely. Risk is an area that I'm like really passionate about, which sounds strange to say, and I kind of fell into it, but and risk means different things to different people. How would you define risk? Risk, there is an international standard that defines risk. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Which means, like, how do you know what you're trying to achieve? What are your objectives? And then anything that you're uncertain about, like, how are you managing that? How are you identifying that? Which means if you have that objective focused, it means you're always focused on, like, the end goal. Whereas I've sat in earlier in my career, really long, arduous risk workshops where like line by line Excel spreadsheets going through every possible hazard. And that to me is not great risk management. It's really about identifying, what do you want to do, what matters most, and how can I manage the things that are going to potentially impact that to minimize my uncertainty.
How do you go about that without, like you just mentioned, having a look at every single thing? Like, how do you manage that under one umbrella, in a sense? Is that tricky to do?
It can be. I think it's just about having a clear process for going through it and making sure everyone's been involved in the process. Risk is one of those disciplines where it does benefit from having a really broad stakeholder group. So it's about kind of balancing all the different inputs, trying to make sense of that all, and work out how do you quantify that, and how do you put that in a meaningful way.
Do you run that through any specific software, or is it more of just a human-based analysis, like where you're looking at it and you can see the trends or you can see the problems, or do you run it through something that gives you an end result? It
depends. So there's different softwares out there that you can do, like probabilistic analysis. So you can do sort of more statistical analysis to run multiple scenarios and go, what's my most likely scenario going to be? So rather than doing it by gut or guesswork, you can have some foundation to it. You can also do really detailed asset risk assessments, where you're kind of looking at, what's the condition of my asset, when's it likely to fail, if it does fail, what happens, what's the likelihood of that happening. So you can do really detailed asset risk assessments that are quantified, and kind of you can use modeling software to do that as well.
That's cool. Let's take a trip down memory lane, if you will.
Let's.
So in the engineering industry, obviously everyone has a bit of a step-by-step process of how they get to where they are. So what would you say are some hurdles or things, hoops you jumped through to get to where you are now? What would you do differently, and what would you suggest other people do as well?
I don't know if I'd do anything differently. I definitely had a very linear view of the world when I left uni. I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, stay in this role for X amount of years. I guess one of the hurdles that I faced earlier in my career was I couldn't progress until I had my chartered status. So I'm a bit of a stubborn person. I don't like being told what to do just for the sake of ticking a box.
That's fair.
But that was a hurdle that I jumped over, and I'm glad I did it, because going through the process and having someone externally deem you to be competent in the area kind of helps with credibility.
It'll be satisfying too.
It's a bit of a I did this.
I show you.
So that was kind of a hurdle. I know we're talking about like old school mentalities. I think that's a mentality. You must be a chartered engineer to demonstrate that you're capable and credible. But that's kind of helped me in other arenas as well, because it is recognized and people value it. So it's, whilst I kind of put my feet in at the time, it was a good career decision for me. And then I kind of I was on a pretty linear path, and then I made a bit of a sideways step whilst I was at Oricon, and I think that was based on a bit of a gut feel, but ended up being one of the best decisions I've made. And since then I don't have a career plan, so I don't have a process for what my next 5 years looks like.
That's fair.
And that's okay. Like, just winging it, you know? See what happens.
That's the thing, because some people sit down, and if they do make that plan, they're like, oh, I want to be here by 2020, blah, blah, blah. I want to be this company, and then I want to be here, and then here. And then something fails along in that step, and then they feel really bad about themselves, and they're like, oh, I'm not where I'm supposed to be.
Definitely.
And they have this like existential crisis, and they're like, oh, I'm meant to be at this company at this point in my career, and that sort of thing. And then it all sort of goes down here, and then they're like, oh, is engineering really for me? And then they have that sort of like look in the mirror, and they're like, oh, what have I done? But I think if you just sometimes just let it go with the flow, if you find yourself in the best scenarios, especially like you just mentioned, gut feeling, like you don't always have to go with your gut feeling, but sometimes when you do, it's for the best. It really is. And I think you run the risk of missing out on other opportunities if you have a really siloed approach of, this is my pathway, this is the only thing that's going to work for me. Someone could be coming with you with opportunities and you don't even recognize it because you're just not looking for it. So I think if you can be open to more opportunities, then it kind of unlocks a more interesting and diverse career. That's one thing that we've found. I mean, like when we first went to university, I was like,
did not see this.
Mechanical engineering, go work on planes, go to this. And then like you get in there and you start talking to other engineers that are studying other majors, and then you hear about what they're talking about, and you get a few networking events, and the next thing you know, you're talking to an engineer from this company, and then they're like, oh, hey, come check out this company. Like, come on the weekend, come check this out. And like, honestly, it's the flow of time just sort of chucks you around a bit, and you can end up in places that you never thought you would.
And everything seems to work out for the best in the end anyway.
Most of the time. Sometimes.
But like, you know, even something that seems like it's not going to work out, it could, you know, lead to something else, which is like a really great opportunity.
You can only ever make a decision at a point in time with the information you have. And so as long as you're comfortable with the decisions you're making, and you accept them and move on, then I don't think you can really expect much more of yourself.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point. So specifically, what sparked your interest in engineering? Do you think where you've ended up now has been because of your interests?
I think when I was a kid, I really liked playing with Lego. Like, I grew up with an older brother, so I always liked that. And I thought I would end up in interior designing.
Oh, okay.
My first job was probably close to that. Like, I was working in built environment doing design work, so it was buildings and had that creative element and that interaction with people. But I wasn't necessarily super focused on engineering when I was at high school or anything. I really liked maths and physics, and one of my high school students recommended I do engineering, and that's kind of how I ended up here.
Both worlds, design and the maths, I guess, and chuck it together, and you got engineering in some sense. And I guess I've stayed because I love problem solving, and so it gives me the opportunity to do that and in a really tangible way, and I find meaning from my work, and it excites me and it challenges me. And I think I'd be bored if I was doing something else. Really? Yeah, like you mentioned, engineering is very satisfying, but there are also other days where you're just like, I'm not seeing anything come out of this. Like, is it really that useful? Then you have the days too where you're like, oh, wow, that's so crazy. Like, what I've done is actually having this effect on somebody or a project. And you're like, that's so gratifying. And at the end of the day, you're like, that's crazy. And I guess for like people like yourself, sort of creative people who want to have more of an input into projects and things like that, and seeing your inputs are having an effect, and like having that creative approach to things completely changes things as well. And I think for engineering, there's some parts of that where if you apply the creative process, you can totally change a project or totally change where something is heading towards.
And I think if you think about the people who are going to be impacted by the work that you do as well, it allows you to work through your designs better or work through your solutions better, but also just better understand how does the work that I do impact people, which for me is where I get meaning from the work that I do. So that's kind of why I like playing in the power and water space, because I fundamentally think that everyone should have access to clean drinking water and reliable power.
So cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's more of like a society point of view, being like, I can help people.
Exactly.
Like engineers are like superheroes in a sense. Like, I can help all these people. It's so great.
Yeah.
So out of all the amazing opportunities and stuff that's come your way throughout your career, what are some things that really stick out, whether it's projects or assignments? Like, what's your favorite so far?
I think favorite and things that stick out are probably not necessarily the same answer, but
go with both then.
Both. I worked on a project over in Port Moresby in PNG, which was incredible because it kind of changed my view of what I could do as an engineer. So originally it was a multi-year project. It's actually still going on, but it's for a national courts complex over there. And I was originally involved in the design and then moved into construction, and I had never thought I will go and work in PNG. It was never on my plan.
Yeah, it's sort of out there.
But I did for like a few years. I'd go over for 3 or 4 days every month and spend time on site and be there. And it really changed my view of what can engineers do and why are we doing this. Like, there was much more connection to the people on that project and much more sort of direct visibility of the work that you're doing and positive impact it was having.
I feel like it's really easy as engineers to disconnect from the people who are actually going to be using what you're doing and just focus on the like the object of what you're trying to create and trying to build.
Definitely.
I think
I think you can get a bit siloed in thinking like, what's the best technical outcome here, rather than thinking like, for that, it wasn't the objective of the project wasn't to get the best technical outcome. For us, it was to do something that could be maintainable in a really low cost and potentially low skilled environment where people weren't available to help maintain the building. So it was all around sustainability. How can we have less artificial lighting and just more open airways and less aircon and those sorts of considerations.
It's such a beautiful thing because you get to see the impact on like not only just a few people but the whole community and the whole society. And people like that haven't really had experiences like we have where they take everything for granted, like our aircon and our running water, and you go over there and you're like, wow, this changes my perspective on everything. And it's like at that point in time you're like, well, maybe engineers are superheroes, you know, like we're going in here and changing these people's entire lives and their communities. It's such a nice uplifting thing. And also like not just that, but you feel like we're impacting these people on a personal level as well. Like we're impacting their life from when the minute they wake up, the minute they go to bed. At some point in that time schedule, we're changing their lives a little bit. It's such a nice thing.
And that probably was a little bit of a turning point in my career where up until then I'd been working in built environment and I loved it, and I loved the aesthetic side of it, like creating beautiful spaces that people enjoyed. But that project for me was kind of a bit of a challenge for, am I focused in the right sector? Could I be doing something differently? So it was a bit of a shifting point for me to think about like, what's my role and what legacy do I want to leave behind?
Yeah, that's true. Was that more of like a sort of reflecting on, do I have the skills sort of thing? Or was it sort of like, this isn't where I want to be?
It was just a little bit jarring spending 4 days in PNG and then coming back to Brisbane. Like, it's like real island time. Everyone takes time to connect. Everyone's really focused on the present and what you're doing here and now. And then coming back into like a really busy office environment where people are working on multiple things and kind of like pulling your attention for things that seem really arbitrary compared to the environment you've been in. It was it's a bit of a hard shift.
Like the problems that we have here are nothing compared to the problems that they have there, and they're trying to raise about. Like here, it's like the coffee machine's broken.
Exactly.
I need it to work.
I don't have my favorite beans.
That's true. So I guess acknowledging that not every great engineer succeeds without failures. What are sort of, I think we touched on this a little bit, but what hoops in particular have you had to jump through to get to where you are today that not other people would really have those hurdles? Is there anything specific to you? And what's been that biggest hurdle?
I've progressed quite fast in my career. I've always been pretty aspirational to like challenge myself and take on stretch opportunities. Obviously with that comes great opportunities, but it also comes challenges if you're a young female leading teams of people who are older than you.
Definitely.
So definitely the age bias is something that I've struggled with a little bit. So you know, having to put a bit more effort into probably proving your credibility and
Yeah.
working on leadership skills and helping people gain confidence in your ability, which is potentially something that other peers of mine haven't had to do in their career at the same
true.
time.
Is that why Chartered was such a big thing? Just doing
Yeah.
that for credibility as well, so you could.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely helped. So whilst I saw it as a hurdle, it actually helped me because I could
Yeah.
walk into a room and say, you know,
I'm
I'm
chartered."
chartered. I know what I'm talking about. Which does hold weight with people, particularly for some old school engineers
Yeah.
who, you know, that's been really important to them. So,
For anyone who doesn't know what Chartered is, could
yeah.
you quickly explain what that is?
yeah, it's probably changed a little bit since I've done it, but it's a process run by Engineers Australia that's sort of an external professional body that looks at your capability against some competency areas of what they deem to be a competent and capable engineer. And then you go through a process of assessment where you submit evidence, and you might have an interview, and then independent assessors kind of test you on your understanding of that engineering discipline, but also things like ethics and
Yeah,
your
okay.
ability to make decisions in potentially difficult situations.
That's important for engineers.
Definitely.
Ethics. Yeah, very important.
On that note, for all aspiring engineers out there, what are some words of wisdom that you would share to help them along their journey? And any tips for university or study that you found helped you?
I think when I left uni, I thought I had to have it all figured out. Like I thought
Yeah.
I needed to know where I was going and what I wanted to focus on. And I didn't at the time. I kind of was just feeling it out. So I don't think you need to have it all figured out.
Yeah.
And I think you can kind of take time and pressure off yourself to do that and just kind of accept where you're at, learn as much as you can and kind of get as many experiences as you can, but you don't have to have it all figured out. And I think anyone who tells you that they do is lying.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah, most definitely. I think it's the same thing when you're coming out of high school as well. Hey,
Yeah.
like at the end of year 12, you're like, okay, this is what I want to be moving towards, and then it just changes the second you hit university. Well, that's what it was like for me anyway.
Yeah.
And it's like completely turns everything on its head
Yeah,
in
nothing
terms
like
of where
it.
you want to go. Yeah, I very much like reminisce on that as well. For sure. Any tips for anyone in university at the moment trying to make waves in the engineering industry, sort of like trying to make waves, like create change, drive innovation, that sort of thing?
I think what we're seeing through students and grads coming through is a real sense of passion and purpose.
That's
so
awesome.
I wouldn't hide that. I think if you're super passionate about something and you know that's kind of something to hold on to, because a lot of people spend their whole careers trying to find that. So if you know what you want to do, then go for it. And if you expect things out of your employer as well, then find an employer that's going to provide that.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think taking some responsibility for your career as well. Like no one else is going to tell you what you should be doing. There's an onus on you to kind of figure out what you want to do, what do you enjoy spending your time. So kind of reflecting and thinking about it. What do I like doing on my day-to-day? Like what would excite me? What would keep me engaged?
Yeah, true.
So just reflecting on like, what do I want out of a career? And then how can I find an employer that might align to that?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing nowadays that companies are slowly getting there, is creating those sort of spaces where you can be yourself and apply your skills, and they're trying to project that a little bit more and being like, hey, you can be yourself here and that's fine, like no one's going to judge you for it. Sort of those safe spaces, which is great, because that's where a lot of the creative decision making comes into place from that, I think,
definitely.
as well. It helps you, jog your brain a little bit more in those sort of spaces because you can be yourself, and I guess you won't hold back on your decision making is what I'm trying to say. So
and I think like that's definitely an environment where I thrive. I like being in an environment where when we're in a project team, everyone's voice is heard, and no idea is a bad idea, and
so
like
important.
let's get it all out on the table. Because I think if you don't have that challenge when you're going through a solution, how do you know that you've got the best outcome?
Yeah, that's true.
So if you don't have that in an employer, it can be hard. So
yeah, very true, because I guess no one really knows the outcome.
exactly.
So,
Especially for some of these emerging areas where we literally haven't done it before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
there's
everyone's
no
voice.
blueprint
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you
on
might as well
what
hear
to do.
everybody. Yeah.
Looking into the future, what do you think are some must-have skills for engineers in your field in the next 5 or 10 years? And what are some insider tips you'd give for students, like directions they could go to make the most of that and stay ahead of the game?
I think what some people call softer skills are super important. So I think ability to communicate not just with other engineers, but with people from different backgrounds is really important, particularly as the world becomes more complex. Like, I think as engineers, we might understand things that others don't, but the ability to understand that yourself and communicate that in a simple way, I think is going to be really important. Curiosity is a skill that you should never lose. It might not be a skill, but maybe it's more a mindset. Just learning, having that growth mindset of, you know, how can I learn more about this, or how can I tackle something in a different way is something that's important. And I think that like sort of self-start, or as I said before, like taking responsibility for your own career is important.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think anyone's going to give it to you on a plate unless you ask for it.
Yeah, I can definitely support that in terms of being like, know what else is out there and know that there are other factors considered into this engineering decision making, and that it's not just engineering. Like there are other people out there like that it impacts everything across the board.
Definitely.
And I'm guessing you've seen like a lot of that.
Yeah,
over time.
definitely in a consulting environment as well, where we don't survive without our clients and we can't do work without our teams and our people. And so we don't own assets. We are a people's-based business. So our teams are really important. So some of those people leadership skills become really important, but then also client engagement. How do you actually understand what people are asking of you? And, you know, how do you again communicate that with them in a way that they understand rather than a way that you understand.
I think that's the biggest problem that some engineers have had is the whole communication aspect of being like, I need to get what's in my brain on a piece of paper and then somehow into their brain. How do you do that? And it's like finding out that link, finding out what right words to say, and it's like that whole sentence structure thing in your head. And like it is a struggle. It is a big problem to challenge. I guess you lay there at night thinking like, oh, should I have said that differently, or should I have approached this differently? And it's like, should I have told them this differently? And if I had, would that have a different impact today? And like you've seen that like over the years in engineering, especially. And I think it's changing a lot now though, which is great.
Yeah, and it's definitely like stepping into the other person's shoes and sort of figuring out like where they're coming from, so you can sort of use language that will be related to what they're already knowledgeable about.
Exactly. Exactly. And no one likes to feel stupid. So if your sole purpose of being an engineer is to be the smartest person in the room, then maybe you're in the wrong room.
Yeah, definitely. We already touched on this a little bit too, but sort of peering into the future, what do you think, what sort of skills for engineers in their field in 5 or 10 years time, let's say, should they start working on? You mentioned communication. Is there anything else that you would recommend?
Probably the other thing that we're seeing is there's more and more data out there. So things that we haven't seen in the past, like data engineers and data analytics, is becoming more and more needed and expected of our clients. So our clients own and manage lots of asset information. They need to make sense of it. And, you know, humans are only capable of doing that to an extent. So how can we optimize software and technology to do that? That's definitely a growing area that we're seeing.
Have you guys looked much into AI and stuff like that? Is that something?
We for some applications, like we have predictive modeling software that we use for things like transport. So, you know, what does the population look like? How do different people move through the system, and what's the most effective way to plan accordingly? So we're looking at things like that for sort of asset infrastructure long-term decisions. Where's the best way to locate different assets? How do we do future scenarios where our future's changing and then it might be a bit more dynamic than it has been previously? So all of software is really helpful for all of that to play out different scenarios.
Yeah. Obviously, balancing like work-life balance is really a huge skill, right, to have. So what are some things that you would suggest people do to have that work-life balance between both working, family, social time and all that, and, you know, bring it all together?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've learnt. I don't think it came naturally to me. I think I overworked in the past, and work was a really big part of my life. It still is, but it doesn't necessarily define me. I think for me, little things really help with my boundaries. So I've got a separate work phone where I can just, at the end of the day, stop checking emails, stop taking phone calls. You know, previously I'd be lying in bed at night checking emails and, you know, getting stressed before I went to sleep, which wasn't working at all.
Yeah.
So
Good idea. Yeah.
I think having boundaries in place, and if it's not a physical boundary, then at least, you know, set a time boundary for yourself when you're going to go home or,
Yeah.
you know. And
When's
that might-
lunch?
Yeah, when's lunch? Am I going to eat at my desk or can I go outside and take a walk? So, yeah, just having an understanding of what works for you. And, like, that might change. Like, some weeks you might be like, work is my number one priority. I'm not going to see my friends and family this week.
But then,
That's
then
okay.
after that,
Then
though, then you can
afterwards,
see them
you
for
can
as
have
as
time
long as you
off
want.
and,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Exactly.
Just like uni. Just like
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a whole different beast, university. Oh, tell
I
you what.
couldn't do it again.
Yeah. So, what are some important skills regarding leadership and communication that you've found to be beneficial when working within your team? Because obviously, like you just mentioned, you're talking to clients, you've got a team, talking to people on a daily basis. In terms of leadership and communication, what's been really useful for you?
I think actively listening. So not just like superficially listening to what people are saying, but sitting with them and understanding what are you saying, whether that be work related or whether they just need someone to talk to. I think that is really helpful just in growing human connections and just acting as a team. And I think what we were talking about before, like creating that psychological safe space so that people feel like they can bring themselves to work and they're not concealing who they are. Because I think like people are happier when they are genuinely operating in a way that's aligned with who they are, and like you're more effective as a team. So it's like a win-win situation if you can think about like how can you make sure everyone's feeling included and valued here, and what do you need to do differently maybe to make sure that happens.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think that's definitely something that we engineers have only just started working on, like I mentioned before. So, yeah, it's really great seeing that come through. Yeah. Anything from a leadership perspective that you've found that works really well? Like anything that you've recently started doing where you're like, hey, this is actually working. People are starting to like, you know, get what I'm
probably becoming more and more
I'm going.
comfortable with just being genuinely who I am in work. So when we talk about work-life balance, I don't like there being a different Ellie in work and a different Ellie in
a little
life.
switch.
Which I probably did do to an extent when I started my career. I was like, oh, I'm going to go and buy new suits. This is what I am. No, I don't party on the weekends. No, I whereas now I'm just a bit more open about who I am and I don't, so that kind of makes it easier for me to see myself in a work environment long term. But I think it also makes you more sort of accessible as a leader. Like you're a human, you're not separated. People can come to you, they feel a bit more comfortable to talk to you.
I think that's a lot on what you touched on before. You said like if this isn't the right place, then maybe there are other places there that are there for you. And I think now that we know that there are other places out there and that whole communication field's building up, and you can go on LinkedIn now and talk to people on there like, oh, what's it like to work in your field and that sort of thing. You can think, oh, if I'm not fitting in here, then maybe I'll fit in over there.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I think that's huge. Like if you don't feel like you're being valued in the environment that you spend 40 plus hours a week sometimes, then that's going to have a huge impact on you and what enjoyment you get out of your work. So I think culture's not to be underestimated.
Oh, definitely. It's huge. And I'm really glad that we're moving towards more positive ways of attacking that and looking at that. Like it's great to see, especially.
Another thing is also like with KPMG, what are some opportunities that some people who are engineers who might be interested in getting into KPMG at one point, what are some opportunities that they can, you know, look forward to coming from the company, like internships, stuff like that?
So we do vacation placements. So we do sort of student placements over Christmas. So our vackies have just left us. They're going back to uni. And we do grad positions. So that application process happens so that you have a bit more certainty in your final year, usually. We're a growing team in IAP. So we kind of have active recruitment out there all the time. Cool. So if we find a good candidate, it's kind of open slather if we can support it. So definitely would encourage people to have a look on the website. There's lots of open opportunities at the moment.
That's awesome.
And reach out, as you said, LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a really good mechanism for connecting with people and just kind of understanding what they do.
And KPMG doesn't just do engineering too. People in finance, law. All that stuff. I
mean, that's kind of been our bread and butter, or like audit and finance, economics. It's pretty much, I think pretty much any uni degree you could think of is hired here.
It's probably a pretty good place for engineers though, because like you mentioned before, you get to interact with all those other people that you wouldn't typically do. Like if you just worked at a straight engineering firm, I mean, you're just surrounded by engineers and people doing project management on a daily basis. But you come to a place like this, and there's people doing accounting, people doing law, legal stuff, and you're like, oh, that's interesting, that's cool. And you can sort of see where you slot into that and where engineering slots into that. And
Definitely.
you think, oh, my degree is like actually like applicable here, and like
super holistic in its approach to just every problem.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if the question gets asked, can you do this? It's normally yes, because there'll be someone who can.
And the connections too. Just What about things in like the sustainability sector and stuff like that, like more technical stuff? What are some problems in that regard? Would you say would be?
I think there has been more focus on it now than I have ever seen throughout my career. So I think sustainability is nothing new, but it's kind of going through a bit of a rebrand where people are calling it ESG, environmental, social and governance, and it's becoming on the topic of all boards. So it's definitely got a renewed focus, as well as decarbonisation, pathway to net zero. So I think that is one area that talent is getting attracted to. Like, people want to be part of the solution. They want to, operate in an environment where they can live out their purpose and passion. So I don't think it's a skills issue. I think we're probably just moving a little bit slower in Australia. And we're potentially going to miss out on our market advantage because other people are just going to do it faster than us. So I think we could be more competitive in Australia and sort of commit, because it's industries that's driving it now. And which is great. It's kind of, that's the pace of change that we need, but we could be doing things faster.
Yeah, definitely. Is that different for companies like KPMG, where they're working with clients and they've got to try and say, hey, look, we got to reach these sustainable aspects and the sustainable goals of what you're trying to do? Does that change things a little bit more, do you think?
I think we've got a real big ability to influence, but we can only go as fast as what our client's appetite is. We do what we can within our control. We've got an impact statement which kind of focuses on how we're minimising our impact to the environment and making sure we've got the right governance in place, and we're thinking about the social considerations. And we've made commitments as well. That's all available. But really, like, that's the beauty of working in a consulting environment. Your ability to have impact on huge client organisations is where we see change. So it's working in with clients and helping them understand, like, where are they at the journey? How can we help them? How can we work alongside there?
Yeah, true. So do you have any advice for any women in STEM at the moment, or women in engineering that are trying to make their way through the industry, or anybody in university, any women in high school even?
I think finding some role models has been important for me. So at points in my career, I haven't had someone who I can look up to and kind of talk to about, what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you. So I think finding some people who have done it and paved the way already is really helpful, because, I mean, there's a great quote that says you can't be what you can't see. So
that's awesome.
If you haven't got any visible role models showing you that it's possible, it can seem a bit daunting. I think, like, lean into it as well. It might sound cliche, but people are actively looking for females in STEM. Women in STEM is massive. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have in our sector, that we're underrepresented. And so, just go for the job. If you think that you've got 50% of the skills, just go for it. I
think it's easy to assume a no before you even go for something.
Just
go for it.
And I think there's some pretty shocking stats about women who apply for jobs compared to men based on their skill sets, where it's women typically wait until they've got most of the skill set needed rather than just putting themselves out there and applying.
Really?
So just know that your male counterparts aren't doing that.
And just remember, like, there's 1,000 companies, and even if you just get a no, that's okay.
Exactly.
No's fine.
Yeah, no's are fine. You're not in any worse position than you were before.
Exactly.
What's the worst they can say? No? So, Ellie, on an end note, if you were given the magic power to wave your wand and fix one pesky problem in the engineering world, what would you choose, and how would you go about tackling it like an engineer?
Probably what we were just talking about. Like, I don't think it's a pesky problem. I think it's a huge problem that women are underrepresented in STEM. So I don't know if there is a magic wand. I've spent most of my career trying to figure it out. So I think there's a couple of things. It's kind of like, what's the problem? The problem is we're underrepresented, and we need more people to accurately represent community, so we're providing better outcomes. So how can we do that? Like, you can attract women, but you need to retain them. There's no point going on a big hiring spree if you're providing a shitty environment for them that they don't want to work in.
Yeah, definitely.
So
Yeah, totally.
that retention piece is really important. And so connections and like making sure you're choosing the right company for you is all part of that problem. But as employers, like making sure we're providing that environment where we're a sort of a workplace that people want to work, and we're attracting the right talent.
Yeah. Not just getting in there to raise the quota, I guess, but also like these people, like let's look at it in the long run, like how are they going to interact with people in the future and teams, not just like let's just get this in because we can raise quotas and we can show that we're we're getting women in the industry. It's not like that at
It can
all.
actually promote some really counterintuitive outcomes where you kind of bring women in and then they feel like they're just a quota, or they're there because you only got the job because you're a woman. So making sure that it's communicated, like we want you for who you are, not your gender.
Yeah, definitely.
is very important.
It's really interesting. Ellie, thank you so much for taking time out to come on
episode.
the
Thanks for
Engineering
having me.
Buzzcast.
No worries.
This is fun.
Yeah.
Broken my podcast cherry.
Because definitely some really good advice there. I think the listeners will really find it valuable.
Yeah,
Excellent.
Yeah, definitely. If anyone looking to get into KPMG or anywhere that has engineering and accounting / law / everything mixed in, like it's such a dynamic workspace.
Yeah.
And I think you touched a lot of good points on communication, as well as leadership and what you're doing most importantly. So
Thank you very much.
Thanks for
Thanks so
having
much
me.
for your time.
No worries.
That's so fun.
Thanks, Ellie. And with all that said, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to share this with your mates or colleagues who also might benefit from these discussions as well. And if you can, just leave an honest review or rating on your preferred podcast platform. With all that said, you've been listening to the Engineering Buzzcast with your hosts, Jacob Primus and Daniel Hardy. And until next time, see you in the next episode.
See you in the next episode.
See ya.
The top job is that of the engineer. This requires a great amount of ability and training in mathematics, and you should have some courses in